When you dance with the devil, the music never stops. And he danced until the world burned. In 1934, Panama City gave birth to a bastard child named Manuel Antonio Noriega Moreno. His mother was a maid, his father unknown, some say a schoolteacher, others whisper darker things. Abandoned as an infant, raised by a godmother in the slums of Terraplén, young Manuel grew up hungry. Not for food, but for respect, for power, for revenge against a world that had thrown him away like garbage. Panama in those days was a divided land, cut in half by an American canal, controlled by foreign soldiers, ruled by oligarchs who spoke Spanish but dreamed in English. The rich lived behind walls, the poor lived in mud. And young Noriega? He lived somewhere in between, watching, calculating, learning that in this world, loyalty was currency and betrayal was survival. He was ugly, scarred by acne so severe his classmates called him Pineapple Face. Girls laughed at him. Boys mocked him. But Manuel didn't cry. He studied. He watched how power moved, how money talked, how violence whispered. And in the cruelty of his childhood, something cold and calculating was born. A mind that felt nothing but understood everything. In 1952, at 18, Noriega enrolled in the Corrillos Military Academy in Peru, not because he loved his country, but because the military was a ladder, and he intended to climb it. While other cadets dreamed of honor and duty, Manuel dreamed of something darker. Control. At Corrillos, he excelled not through strength, but through cunning. He learned how to manipulate, how to gather information, how to turn whispers into weapons. His instructors noticed something unsettling about the young Panamanian. He never got angry, never lost composure, never showed emotion. He was a blank slate, a mirror that reflected whatever you wanted to see, and that made him dangerous. But it was in Peru where Manuel Antonio Noriega first tasted the forbidden fruit, intelligence work. He began informing on fellow students, reporting their secrets to military officers, building a web of leverage and blackmail. This wasn't patriotism, this was practice. He was learning the oldest game in the world, how to own people without them knowing they were owned. When he returned to Panama in 1962, he was no longer just a soldier. He was a spy, and the United States was watching. The year was 1967. The world was burning with Cold War paranoia, and Panama sat at the crossroads of it all. A tiny nation controlling the greatest shortcut in global trade. The Americans needed eyes and ears in Central America, and the CIA needed local assets, men who understood the streets, who spoke the language, who could move in shadows. They found Manuel Noriega. The CIA didn't care that he was corrupt. They didn't care that he was ruthless. They cared that he was useful. And Noriega? He didn't care about ideology or patriotism. He cared about power. So they made a deal. The Americans gave him money, protection, and intelligence. He gave them secrets, loyalty, and access. It was a marriage made in hell, and both sides knew it. For years, Noriega operated as a double agent, reporting to the CIA while simultaneously building relationships with Cuba, with Fidel Castro, even with the Soviets. He played every side against the middle, collecting paychecks from enemies, selling information to whoever paid more. The Americans thought they owned him. The Cubans thought they controlled him. But Manuel Noriega owned only one thing: himself. By the early 1970s, he had risen through the ranks of the Panamanian National Guard, becoming Chief of Military Intelligence. And in that position, he discovered his true calling, not just gathering secrets, but owning them. Blackmail became his religion. Extortion became his art. And violence became his language. He knew which politicians cheated on their wives, which businessmen laundered money, which priests visited brothels, and he kept files on all of them. Thick folders filled with photographs, recordings, confessions. In Panama, Noriega didn't just have power. He had leverage over power itself. In 1981, Panama's military strongman Omar Torrijos died in a mysterious plane crash. Some called it an accident. Others whispered assassination. But everyone knew one thing: the throne was empty, and the vultures were circling. Noriega didn't rush. He waited. watching as rivals tore each other apart, as ambitious generals made their moves too early, too loudly. And then, in 1983, he struck. Not with a coup, not with violence, but with patience. He maneuvered, he manipulated, he whispered in the right ears. And when the dust settled, Manuel Antonio Noriega was commander of the Panamanian Defense Forces. He was no longer just a spy. He was the dictator of Panama. But Noriega understood something that other tyrants didn't. Visibility was weakness. So he ruled from the shadows, installing puppet presidents, controlling elections, pulling strings while others stood in the spotlight. On paper, Panama was a democracy. In reality, it was Noriega's kingdom, and he was its invisible king. His first act? Purging the military. Anyone who questioned him disappeared. Anyone who showed too much ambition was demoted, exiled, or found floating in the canal. He didn't need to kill everyone, just enough. Just enough to send the message. In Panama, there is only one God, and his name is Noriega. The Americans watched, uncomfortable but complicit. Yes, he was brutal. Yes, he was corrupt, but he was their brutal, corrupt dictator. He gave them intelligence on leftist movements, on communist infiltration, on Sandinistas in Nicaragua and rebels in El Salvador. And in the chess game of the Cold War, that made him valuable. But behind closed doors, Manuel Noriega was building something else, something darker. An empire not of soldiers, but of powder and dope and crystal. He was about to become one of the biggest stuff traffickers in the Western Hemisphere. By the mid-1980s, the stuff trade was exploding. Colombian cartels, Medellín and Cali, were flooding the United States with powder and dope, making billions, corrupting governments, and turning entire nations into their playgrounds. And Panama, with its canal, its banks, its secrecy laws, became the perfect laundromat for blood money. Noriega saw the opportunity and seized it with both hands. He didn't just allow the cartels to use Panama, he became their partner. He offered them protection, gave them safe houses, provided false passports, and laundered their cash through Panamanian banks. In exchange, he took millions. Some say he made $200 million a year. Others say more. The truth? Even he probably lost count. The Medellín Cartel paid him to let their planes refuel in Panama. The Cali Cartel paid him to use Panamanian ships. Cuban intelligence paid him to share American secrets. And the CIA? They kept paying him too, because he was still useful, still feeding them information, still playing the game. Manuel Noriega had become the ultimate middleman, a trafficker without a cartel, a dictator without a country, a spy without loyalty. He was selling to everyone and loyal to no one. And for a while, it worked. The money flowed like water. The power grew like a tumor. And Noriega? He believed he was untouchable. He walked through Panama City surrounded by armed guards, sunglasses hiding dead eyes, his face a mask of arrogance. He threw lavish parties where politicians mingled with cartel bosses, where generals drank with gangsters, where the line between government and crime dissolved completely. Panama had become a narco-state, and Noriega was its CEO. But empires built on powder and blood always collapse, and his was about to crumble. In 1986, a Panamanian pilot named Floyd Carlton was arrested in the United States. Facing life in prison, he did what everyone in the game eventually does. He talked. And what he said changed everything. Carlton testified that Manuel Noriega wasn't just protecting traffickers, he was one of them. That Panama wasn't just a transit point, but a trafficking hub. That the general wasn't just corrupt, he was the corruption. And suddenly, the Americans had a problem. Their asset, their ally, their pet dictator, was now a liability. The war on stuff was ramping up. Reagan was making speeches about just say no. And the last thing Washington needed was proof that they'd been paying a stuff lord for decades. So they made a decision. Manuel Noriega had to go. At first, they tried pressure. Economic sanctions, frozen bank accounts, diplomatic isolation. They thought he would fold, that he would flee, that he would disappear quietly into exile with his millions. But they didn't understand Noriega. He wasn't like other dictators. He didn't fear poverty. He feared irrelevance. And he wasn't going anywhere. Instead, he doubled down. He declared himself Panama's maximum leader, rigged elections openly, and when opponents protested, he crushed them with violence. In 1989, opposition candidate Guillermo Endara won the presidential election by a landslide. Noriega annulled the results and had his thugs beat Endara bloody in the streets, on camera, for the world to see. The images went global. A bloodied candidate stumbling through Panama City, his white shirt soaked in red, while Noriega's goons laughed. It was a message. Democracy is dead here. I am the law. But that image was also Noriega's death sentence. Because now, the world was watching. And America couldn't look away. December 20th, 1989. 1 a.m. The night sky over Panama City exploded with fire. 27,000 American troops poured into the country. Paratroopers dropping from C-130s. Helicopters shredding the darkness with machine gun fire. Tanks rolling through streets while fighter jets screamed overhead. It was the largest American military operation since Vietnam. And it had one objective: capture Manuel Antonio Noriega. The Pentagon called it Operation Just Cause. The Panamanians called it an invasion. For 5 days, Panama burned. Noriega's defense forces fought back, but they were no match for American firepower. Entire neighborhoods were leveled. Hundreds died. Soldiers, civilians, children caught in crossfire. The poor barrio of El Chorrillo was destroyed completely, burned to ash, its residents fleeing into the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And Noriega? He vanished. The Americans searched everywhere: his mansions, his mistress's homes, his military bases. They found pornography, voodoo altars, bags of white powder, and stacks of cash. But no Noriega. The dictator had become a ghost, moving through the ruins of his own empire, hunted by the most powerful military on earth. For 10 days, he ran. 10 days of paranoia and panic, sleeping in safe houses, trusting no one, knowing that every friend was now a potential traitor, every shadow a possible assassin. The man who once controlled everything now controlled nothing. The man who once inspired fear now felt it for the first time. On December 24th, 1989, Christmas Eve, Manuel Noriega walked into the Papal Nuncio, the Vatican's embassy in Panama City, and requested asylum. The wolf had become a sheep, begging for sanctuary. Outside, American soldiers surrounded the building. They blasted rock music at maximum volume. Van Halen, AC/DC, The Clash, a psychological weapon designed to drive him mad, to break him, to force him out. For 10 more days, Noriega hid inside, negotiating, stalling, praying to a god he had never believed in. But there was no escape, no tunnel, no bribe, no miracle. On January 3, 1990, Manuel Antonio Noriega surrendered. He walked out of the embassy, hands raised, wearing his military uniform one last time. The Americans put him in chains, loaded him onto a plane, and flew him to Miami. The dictator who played God was now just a prisoner in an orange jumpsuit. His trial began in 1991 in a Miami federal courthouse. For months, the world watched as witness after witness testified to Noriega's crimes. Pilots who flew stuff for him, cartel members who paid him, bankers who laundered his money, soldiers who executed his enemies. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had turned an entire nation into a criminal enterprise, who had murdered rivals, trafficked tons of powder and dope, and corrupted every institution he touched. The evidence was overwhelming: recordings, documents, testimonies from those who had worked beside him and lived to tell. Noriega's defense? He claimed he was a political prisoner, a victim of American imperialism, a patriot who had been betrayed by the country he served. He said the CIA had authorized everything, that Washington had used him and then thrown him away when he became inconvenient. And you know what? He wasn't entirely wrong. The trial revealed uncomfortable truths, that the CIA had paid Noriega over $300,000 over the years, that American officials had turned a blind eye to his trafficking because he provided useful intelligence, that the U.S. government had enabled a monster, then invaded a country to destroy the monster they'd created. But guilt and innocence didn't matter anymore. Politics didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the verdict. On April 9, 1992, Manuel Antonio Noriega was found guilty on 8 counts of stuff trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering. he was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. The pineapple-faced boy from the slums of Panama City had finally been caged. For the next 17 years, Noriega sat in American prisons, first in Miami, then in other federal facilities. No more power, no more fear, no more control, just silence, concrete walls, and the ghosts of everyone he had destroyed. He read, he exercised, he prayed, though to which God no one knew. He wrote letters protesting his innocence, claiming he was a prisoner of war, demanding to be treated with dignity. But no one listened. The world had moved on. Panama had moved on. Even his own family barely visited. In 2007, after serving his sentence, Noriega thought he might finally taste freedom. But France wanted him too, for laundering money through French banks. So they extradited him to Paris, where he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 7 more years. And then Panama wanted him. His homeland, the country he had ruled like a god, now demanded justice. In 2011, he was extradited again, this time back to Panama City, back to the streets where he once walked untouchable, back to the nation he had bled dry. He was tried in absentia for the murders he had ordered, the dissidents he had disappeared, the bodies buried in mass graves, guilty on all counts. More years added to a sentence that no longer mattered. On May 29, 2017, Manuel Antonio Noriega died in a Panama City hospital. He was 83 years old, his body ravaged by a brain hemorrhage, his mind gone, his empire dust. There were no state funerals, no monuments, no crowds mourning. Just a few family members, a priest, and a wooden casket. The man who once commanded armies, who dined with presidents and cartel bosses, who held an entire nation hostage, was buried in a simple grave. Some Panamanians celebrated, others felt nothing. Most had already forgotten him. But his legacy? That lived on. Today, Panama is a different country. The canal is theirs now, returned by the Americans in 1999. The economy thrives on banking and trade. Democracy, fragile but real, has taken root. But the scars remain. Noriega's corruption didn't die with him. It mutated. The trafficking routes he opened are still in use. The money laundering networks he built still operate, just under different names. The institutions he corrupted still struggle with credibility. He proved that a single man with enough cruelty and intelligence could hijack an entire nation. And that lesson hasn't been forgotten. Around the world, dictators studied him. Traffickers admired him. Intelligence agencies learned from him. Because Manuel Noriega wasn't just a criminal or a dictator. He was a blueprint, a case study in how far a man can go when he has no conscience, no loyalty, and no fear. He showed that you can serve 2 masters if you betray them both. That you can traffic stuff while working for the CIA. That you can rule a nation while destroying it. That you can dance with the devil for decades, as long as you're willing to burn when the music stops. What do we learn from Manuel Antonio Noriega? That power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. Noriega wasn't made evil by authority. He was always evil, just waiting for the opportunity. That loyalty is a lie told by those who need you, and forgotten by those who don't. That America will support monsters as long as they're useful, and destroy them the moment they're not. That every empire built on powder and blood will collapse. That betrayal is the only constant in the game. That no one is untouchable, no matter how much they believe they are. Noriega thought he was smarter than everyone. That he could outplay the CIA, outwit the cartels, outlast his enemies. And for a while, he did. But in the end, the game always wins. The house always wins. And the player dies alone, forgotten, buried in an unmarked grave. Some men serve their country. Some men betray it. But a few become the country itself. A living monument to corruption, greed, and the dark truth that power is the only god worth worshipping. Manuel Noriega didn't lose because he was evil. He lost because even the devil has masters. And when they called his name, he had nowhere left to hide.